Richard is the driving force behind this book, no question about that. He's also the scientific brain behind this book, and he has achieved TWS Book of the Year on 3 separate occasions. This book now has been entered for that, and we know that we have been shortlisted as the final 5 for Book of the Year in America in the Wildlife Society. So that's, most encouraging and very pleasing. So now I'd like to move you over to Richard, who will speak on a scientific basis for the next half hour, and then I'll take over and talk to you about the bits that I did.
Okay, so we're going to start just by looking at the evolution of falcons, which started way back 60 million years ago, probably. This is a nest which was found in China. It was recently found, I think, the first paper on it was in 2022. It was found, I think, the previous year. It was a whole nest of an oviraptoroid, which comprised all of these eggs, which were unfortunately drowned, and so they didn't ever mature. So an individual egg is like that. It's like Cretaceous dinosaur, and inside the X-rays produced this image. Well, this image has been carved out, and what amazed me was how much this looks like a bird now. And when someone drew the skeleton of what the chick looked like inside that egg, for all the world this looks very much like an ordinary bird. And in fact, an artist's representation of it looks even more like a bird. And to give you some idea of what that looks like, that's a pigeon of more or less the same age. Now, I didn't manage to find an image which was exactly the same in terms of its format, the way that it was structured, but it looks very, very similar to what these forerunners of birds of prey looked like, something like 60 million years ago. And this is an artist's impression of what a female looked like on that nest prior to that nest being inundated and killing, unfortunately, all the little chicks that were inside the nests. So what we now know is that the falcons themselves, the falco family, came into being somewhere in the region of about 4 million years ago, which was more or less the same time as human beings also came into being. And they came into being in more or less the same place, which was the time of the C4 grasslands in Africa. And Tom Cade, in one of his books, maintained that it was the fact that human beings and falcons evolved in more or less the same time actually brought humans who were watching these birds flying around the sky, and brought the two families together, the humans and the falcons. And Tom Cade always maintained that that's why it was that we all like falcons at this stage. So this is Tunstall's falcon, which is the forerunner of peregrines, the actual peregrine itself, the one that is the type species. This bird is in trim, and it has one glass eye and one non-eye, because when it was on display in the museum, the Natural History Museum here in London, it was the top bit which was showing to the public, and so you only need one glass eye, and that's why it is the feathers on that side have been rather more studded than on the other ones. And this now is in trim. It's one of the specimens which they hold in trim. And when Steve came up with me, because we were looking to photograph this bird and do a few other bits and pieces in trim, because we wanted some more of their photographs, Trim asked if it was possible that he, a peregrine lover for the last 40 years, was he allowed to hold Tunstall's peregrine, the actual type specimen. And he was told yes he could if he handled it gently. And he picked it up and the leg fell off. And to his horror the leg fell off, but the person from Trim said, oh, don't worry about it. We had to stick that leg back with a little bit of plasticine at some stage, and so, I'll stick it back in again in a minute, don't worry. But it was a lovely moment from my point of view, I'll tell you. So anyway, this is Falco peregrinus, the tunstall one, 1771, discovered on the Isle of Man, and is now in the Trim Museum, and is the forerunner of all peregrines. No, not the forerunner, the type specimen of peregrines. So this is the map of where peregrines are. Depending upon your point of view, there are either 17 subspecies or 19, depending upon whether or not the Barbary falcon is a peregrine, and depending upon whether or not this falcon, which is in the southwestern tip of Australia, is different from the falcon, the Macropus, which actually occurs over the rest of Australia. So in the book, we actually do all 17 subspecies, and we do Peregrinoides as well, and we mention the Australian potential to be a 19th species. So peregrines are incredibly diverse. So they're all the way up to the Arctic Circle, and they're almost down to the Antarctic Circle, but not quite. Although in Chile, they actually go all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, which is as far south as you can go, basically, unless you're an Antarctic specialist. And through those 17 subspecies, they do vary both in size and in coloration. This is Pelii, it's from North America, or from the Aleutian Islands, basically. And that's generally thought to be the biggest, although the Peregrinus is actually almost as big in some sexes, but the Pelii is extremely dark, and probably one of the darkest, although there is a darker one in Asia as well, or a dark one in Asia. And so they vary from that one to minor, which is the one which is in Africa, where the male only weighs up perhaps to 300 grams. Way up in the north, in the Arctic, they are very, very pale. I mean, this one is particularly interesting because it's got a pale head as well, which not all of the tundrious birds actually do have a pale head. But this one does. This one was photographed actually at Rankin Inlet in Arctic Canada. And there's a similar one in the Calidus in Siberia, which is almost as pale as well. And then across in the Philippines and Malaysia, we have the Ernesti, which is extremely dark and very rusty coloured on its breast. In South America, we get the combination because South America is so big, because the peregrines are actually all the way up to the Caribbean and all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, and across that enormous range they can be very dark or they can be very pale, depending upon the individual regions, which is interesting. And then across in Asia we get some really beautiful birds. This is Babylonicus, which is in Central Asia, which is, from my point of view, one of the most attractive of all of them. And you get odd island birds as well. This is Rodama, which is from Madagascar, which is very, very interesting in its plumage. And across in India, the western side of India, you get Peregrinator. Peregrinator is very, very interesting in itself, because on the western side, which is Gujarat in India, they are very brightly coloured like this. So they have this sort of very dark grey back, a black hood, and this beautiful rose-coloured breast. Whereas on the eastern side, which is where India meets I guess Burma, probably in the first instance, or whatever bird was called nowadays, can't remember. Where they are much closer to Peregrinus in terms of their coloration. But the Gujarat birds are this beautiful, beautiful colour, that colour, which is really lovely. And across that enormous range, so that is north of the Arctic Circle down to Tierra del Fuego, all the way from the west coast of America, all the way to the east coast of Russia. they feed on whatever they can get their claws on, whatever they can get their talons on. And what's interesting is that they will take whatever it is that they can find. They are very eclectic in terms of their diet. And studying their diet is itself pretty interesting. Now, this one is of the birds in Fiji, and across the Fijian Islands, which are not particularly large in the Pacific Ocean, you get three very distinct areas: dry grassland, rainforest and sea cliffs. And the peregrines will hunt and breed in all of those areas. And they vary their diet depending upon which area they're in. So in dry grassland they will take some bats and other birds. In the rainforest they'll take bats almost exclusively. And on the coast they'll take seabirds and waders. So they're very eclectic, and that's one of the reasons why they've been able to settle and breed basically anywhere. And particularly we noticed in Australia that in successive years in Australia, 3 successive years, they were just modifying the percentage of prey that they were taking depending upon what was available to them in any individual year. So as the year changed and the variation between the parrots and the pigeons and the gulls and the terns, depending upon where they were, the peregrines have just changed their diet in order to take whatever it is that's available. So they are incredibly good at breeding in areas where they can take whatever it is that they can lay their talons on. But as the introduction said, my particular interest in is flight. I'm very interested in how it is that the birds do what they do. In particular, what I'm interested in is how they manage to breathe when they're flying at high speed, how their bones have been structured in order to cater for the forces which are applied to the wing when they're at high speed, and how their eyesight has been modified in order to spot prey from great distances, because in order to accelerate to high speed, you have to be able to see a long way. And so that particularly is what interests me. And this is a typical stoop for a peregrine. In the first instance, they're flapping flight, so they're waiting until they see something which they're going to dive at, maybe a pigeon flock which is underneath them, whatever. And then they turn into, with a few wing beats, they turn into a dive. And the first thing that they do is they modify their shape into what's known as the teardrop, the T shape, which minimises the drag on the body. It minimises drag on the body, and as a consequence they can fly almost vertically. They never want to fly absolutely vertically because of course they lose control at that speed, but they can modify the drag, they can reduce the drag very much in order to accelerate the speed. Once they've accelerated speed, they turn into what's known as the C shape, and the C shape allows them with a cupped wing to actually start to modify which direction they're flying in, so they can now hunt down their prey at high speed. So they've developed the high speed, now they're actually manoeuvring their speed. And then ultimately they push the wings out further, which gives them much better, much finer control over the direction in which they're flying, but it also reduces speed, because you don't want to hit something at nearly 100 miles an hour, because that might just create a ball of feathers for both of you. So these are a couple of the speeds. This is the M shape, which is the final shape that they use just prior to hitting something, if they're actually going to hit it, or to allow them to come up from underneath and grab the softer part of the body, because the upper part of any bird is actually more difficult to grab hold of than is the breast. And just to show you, this is the cup shape, the C shape. So that's the maximum speed. Well, that's not necessarily the maximum speed, but it's the fastest speed that they are going at, which allows them to alter the direction in which they're traveling. Now, in order to do this, they have to be able to breathe, because at high speed you don't want your lungs to collapse. And you have two problems. You need to see, and you don't want the lungs to collapse as a result of overpressurization. And so they have developed a very interesting nasal structure, which starts with the bony tubercle, that's this bit, which is now basically the same design as put into jet engines, because the people who build jet engines have taken that design from the Peregrine and put it into the jet engine, because that also has to have a reduction in air pressure in order to work properly. So they have this tubercle, and on the inside of it, they have a maze-like structure, which we've been able to get a CT scan of, so you can actually see what that maze-like structure looks like in 2 dimensions, well, in 3 dimensions, obviously, with 2 slices. So you can see the maze-like structure which is being produced here. Unfortunately, I can't pause this very easily. It's better get paused. But we get a pause one later. Quite right. So that's in one dimension. This is in the 2nd dimension, looking down with vertical slices through the skull. And again, you can see the formation of this maze-like structure as it comes across from the tubercle and goes back in towards the lungs. And this maze-like structure actually reduces the pressure which is applied to the lung. And we're doing more examinations at the moment to see what the evolutionary history is of these particular maze-like structures, going back on CT scanning caracaras, forest falcons, and also parrots to see where this has all come from. So this is the structure. This is the cross-section here across the nasal passages, and you can see this very maze-like structure. This is bony maze-like structure here. This is more flesh-like in the back. This is a bird which was freshly dead. It was a bird which I was flying, or Steve and I were flying. Well, actually, the Falcon who owned it technically was flying it. And very unfortunately, it was electrocuted on a pilot, wasn't it? On a pilot, just before Christmas. It was October and November of last year. And so the moment it was killed, he rang up and said, did I want it? I said, yeah, put it in the deep freeze, because we definitely do want it. So we were able to scan this bird when it was very recently dead. And we've been now looking at older specimens of skulls to see if there are any differences that we can spot. And the answer is not many, which is very, very good news. So we have a modified nasal structure. So that's one way that the bird can travel at high speed, but it also has, whoops, I pressed the wrong one. They also have a modified wing structure as well. Now this is a wind tunnel shear stress diagram of a model bird, a model C-shaped or T-shaped peregrine in a wind tunnel in Germany, and I've been doing, with thanks to Erwin Gowrie, who's the guy who's been doing most of this work, and it shows where the maximum stress is on the wing during the course of any stoop. And the maximum stress is dependent upon the shape. It's either on the humerus and a little bit less on the ulna, or it's on the radius and the ulna, and slightly less on the humerus. So that means that the humerus and the radius and ulna must have been modified over time, over evolutionary time, in order to combat these stresses. Because any ordinary bird like a blackbird or a robin, who's only going to be flying at 10 or 15, 20 miles an hour, is not necessarily going to have its structure modified. But a bird which habitually is reaching speeds up around 80 to 90 miles an hour must have evolved a better bone structure. And so, whoops, wrong button again. So what I'm interested in is looking at how we can do the mathematics, if you like, on these bone structures to see exactly how these bones have been formed and what dimensions they are, whether they're different, in order to look at whether or not the bones have been reinforced against bending, or whether or not the bones have been reinforced against torsion. Now the difference will be in the humerus. The humerus is fixed at one end by the body of the bird. And so the humerus is most likely to bend during the course of a high-speed stoop, whereas the radius and the ulna, which are not fixed at either end, or are very, very, very loosely fixed because there's nothing rigid at either end of those bones, what they will try and do is twist. And so we've got the humerus, which is strengthened potentially against bending, and the radius and the ulna, which are potentially strengthened against torsion. So that led me on to finding these particular, well, that's the same diagram again, sorry about that. So what I'm after now are specimens of individual humerus for the 4 British breeding falcons to see whether or not these bones are different for the falcons because of the way that they behave, because of their hunting behavior. So at the top we've got a peregrine humeri. Next underneath is Hobby. Then underneath is the Kestrel. Now the Kestrel does not use high-speed stooping, whereas the Merlin underneath does. So even though the Merlin is a much lighter bird than the Kestrel, its humerus bone has been strengthened against the requirements of high-speed hunting. So what's interesting about the humerus is what its internal structure looks like. And its internal structure at both ends reduces the weight of the bone by using a trabecular structure of fine struts which actually hold the bone together. And the bone itself is thinner at the 2 ends where you have this trabecular structure which is lighter weight, and thicker in the middle. And so if you actually do an analysis of exactly what the bone thickness is of that bone, what you find is that it's thinner at the 2 ends, where it's got the trabecular structure, but thicker in the middle. So what that bone is strengthened against is bending. It's not going to bend, which is exactly what you want in that particular bone, the humerus. For the ulna and the radius, you have a different situation. You've still got the trabecular structure at both ends because you want to reduce the weight of the bone, but in addition, you have this fine structure here. At both ends, you have a fine structure. That's the ulna. The proximal is to the right in that particular image. On this one, with the radius, is the distal to the right, but nonetheless, you've got the same structure, that you look at trabecular at both ends, and this fine structure, which is on the internal of the bone itself. And what that is, in fact, you can see these again. So this is the bone external, which shows you what the thickness is. And you can see that you've got this fine structure in the middle and at both ends, which is slightly different. And what you have is basically something which is pretty similar to what you get in the inner of a kitchen roll or a toilet roll, which actually prevents the roll from torsional stretch. Because if without this, you would just be able to break it in half. But you can't break it in half with torsion simply because this internal structure, well, not the way that the cardboard is made up, but the internal structure in the bone actually prevents the bone from actually torquing. So that was interesting. So the next thing is the bird is going to fly at high speed. Just how high is the speed that this bird is going to get? And here, science actually interacts with a bird called Frightful, which is flown by a guy called Ken Franklin, and apparently it achieved 242 miles per hour, which was the fastest bird ever recorded and was in the Guinness Book of Records. But was this a real speed? In a sense, it was a real speed, but what we need to remember is that what Frightful was doing 240 miles an hour, it was doing it at 17,000 feet. It was not doing it at ground level. When National Geographic put a unit onto the bird to see exactly how fast it was going, the speed which that unit measured was 183 miles per hour and that was almost at sea level. It was almost, sorry, no, I don't want to do that. Can I go back? Yeah. You know. So it was doing it about here, 183 miles an hour. And so I did a calculation, which is how fast will a teardrop-shaped bird travel, measuring its cross-sectional area, which is what's pushing through the air, and so on. And the calculation says that at sea level, the fastest that bird can go is 184 miles an hour. And so that's reasonable, that's reasonably good compared with 183, which was actually measured. But the reality of the situation is that the bird is never going to achieve those speeds, because the acceleration to achieve those sorts of speeds takes a long time. And what the bird is trying to do is not break a speed record, it's actually trying to catch its breakfast. And as a consequence, under most circumstances, a peregrine will never achieve more than about 100 miles an hour. And we know that one bird which had a unit placed on it and then escaped, basically. And for 4 years, that bird was delivering data to a satellite. And in the whole of that 4-year period, that bird never travelled in more than 88 miles per hour. And they only did that once, I think. So under normal circumstances, a peregrine will not travel at those speeds. And the fastest speed which has ever been genuinely recorded for a wild bird was a Gyrfalcon in Alaska, which did about 130. And that's also very, very rare. Because what the bird is trying to do, as I said, it's not trying to break speed records, it's trying to get its breakfast. Now, in order to do this, at those sorts of speeds, it has to be able to see. Of course it does. And we all know that if you strap yourself to the back of an aircraft, an biplane, and the biplane is doing 100 miles an hour, nobody can see unless they have glasses on, because the wind takes all the liquid out of the eye, and you just go effectively blind. And what the bird's got is it's got a nictitated membrane in the first instance, which is there, which comes across the eyeball, which gives it extra protection against going at high speed. And in addition to the lateral gland, which we all have, which sprays our eye with a relatively low viscosity liquid, the birds have also got a hyderial gland, which secretes a much more viscous material, which covers the eye and protects the eye against these high speeds. So now we know that the bird is strengthened against, its body is strengthened against the speed of high-speed stooping, its lungs are protected against high-speed stooping, and its eyesight is also protected against high-speed stooping. So this is the eyesight, this is a cross-section of the eye of the bird, basically, since they're all pretty much like this. And whereas you and I have a series of blood vessels in the back of our eye, which actually restricts our vision to a certain extent, because we're going to look through a forest of blood vessels, birds don't. They have a single pector, and all the minerals and requirements, etc., of the eye comes in through that and reduces the amount of light which falls upon the retina. So they have better eyesight than we do. They also see more colours than we do. Whereas we see basically the three bottom colours, RGB, they actually see something which is in the UV, and most birds see within the UV. Peregrine Falcons certainly do see 4 colours, and some birds, such as the pigeon, for instance, see 5. In addition, they have better eyesight both spatially and temporally. And what that means is, spatially, is how close together can you see objects, because that assists your eyesight. And that is measured using a thing called CPD, which is cycles per degree. Human beings can see about 60. In other words, at this distance, in 1% of arc, they can see 60 of these lines. Peregrine falcons can see about 120. So they're seeing twice the spatial vision, they have twice the spatial acuity that we have. In addition, they also see things faster. Now, faster is measured by using the flicker fusion frequency. As probably most of you know, if you go and watch a cinema where they're playing a film, rather than the digital image, they're playing an ordinary celluloid film, they play it at 30 frames a second. Because below 30 frames a second, you see the flicker. But at about 30 frames a second, most people do not see the flicker. They just see a continuously moving image. Some young children can actually see the flicker on a neon tube at 50 frames a second. Peregrine Falcons can see at 125 times a second. So not only can they see their spatial acuity is twice what our acuity is, but they can see their flicker, they can see the speed. The temporal visual acuity is up to 4 times better than ours. So they see faster, they see closer. They're pretty good, actually, these birds. So this is the eye. They have another advantage over us, and that advantage is the one which is sometimes causes a great deal of our heartache between some scientists who wonder exactly how much stronger their vision is than ours in terms of multiplication. And that's very difficult to assess. One of the reasons is because it's very hard to ask a bird what it can see. But in general terms, you know, the answer is cluck. But what we have is one muscle, the Brooks muscle, which affects the lens, the iris that we use for visual acuity. The birds, the falcons have two. They also have Crampton's muscle, which affects the lens, the shape of the lens. So they can move the shape of the lens, which we can't do. And finding out exactly what that means in terms of what their visual acuity might be is very, very difficult. And so you see some people that say, well, it might be 2 or 3 times better than ours. But the reality of the situation is that people like Steve, who has been watching falcons for years using high-speed, using 10 times magnification binoculars, can see a bird seeing prey at a distance and then watch the bird and it disappears from out of the binoculars. And then a minute or so later it comes back into focus again and it's carrying prey. And so undoubtedly they are seeing better than 10 times what we see, better than 10 times binoculars. The best estimate is probably around 15 times better. In addition to which, when I was working in the Arctic, I was noticing Gyrfalcons who were hunting on Ellesmere Island. Was it Ellesmere Island? No, it was Blythe Island. And there was the female was on the eggs behind me, and I'm watching the male, and he's hunting Arctic ground squirrels at the end of a parallel-sided valley. The valley was almost parallel. It was a remarkable piece of valley. And this valley was almost 2 miles long. And this bird was coming over my head in order to hunt the ground squirrels. This is an Arctic ground squirrel. They're about half the size of a rabbit. And this Gyrfalcon was hunting these on a regular basis. Now, the very interesting thing about Arctic ground squirrels is that they never move more than about 50 meters away from the little hollow in which they breed and stay, unless they're out feeding. And so they would scamper back into their burrow, and the falcon would come in at them. And when I was watching them, I was noticing that the Gyrfalcons weren't flying in a straight line. Now, for you and I, the fastest point between the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. These birds were flying in a curve, and this bird was flying in a right-hand curve every time he was going for these Arctic ground squirrels. So I came back and went to a university in Britain and said, these birds are flying in a curve, why are they doing that? And they said, effectively, you're an idiot, go away. So I did go away, and I had a look at what they have in terms of visual acuity, and discovered that what falcons have, which we don't have, is a second point of visual acuity. Whereas we only have one fovea, they have two. And the deep fovea, the second fovea, is much better, is much more visually acute than the first one. And so what you've got, if you're a falcon, is a small area of binocular vision, simply because you have a very big eye and a bill in front of it. And so your binocular vision is restricted to about 35 degrees. But for your deep fovea vision, which is monocular on both sides, you've got about 132 degrees of vision. And so what I then realized was that the bird, what the bird is doing, is using this deep fovea to look at prey at a distance. And the bird is coming in on its deep fovea vision and then transferring to binocular vision when it needs to be able to pick out exactly where the bird is using binocular vision. And so I did a quick calculation. If you're trying to minimize drag because you want to get there as fast as possible, then you don't want to move your head. So you're going to fly in a straight line, absolutely straight line for minimum drag. But your deep fovea vision is looking at an angle of 40 degrees. If that's the case, what is your flight path going to be? So you can do the mathematics of this. It's not particularly difficult mathematics. And what it shows is your flight path is going to be what's known as a logarithmic spiral. Logarithmic spiral is seen occasionally in nature. It's in the new broccoli thing, whose name I can never remember, Romanesque. But it's also in analyses as well. And so you fly, what you do is you fly in a curve. And so I then built this, which is a unit that weighs 3 grams. It collects satellite data 18 times a second. It has a triaxial accelerometer, magnetometer, and to vary the distance that the bird is flying. I can do all the parameters for what the bird is doing. And then we went and trained a bird, a male peregrine, to go to its handler at increased distances. So we started off, about 300-400 yards, and then we increased it until eventually we were letting the bird go almost 2 miles away from the handler so that we could see exactly how it was going to fly. Now, because we were training this bird in mid-Wales, there was no point in trying to do the test in mid-Wales because it already knew the topography, the local topography, because it had been flying there for the last year. So we took it to the Black Mountains, and it had never flown in the Black Mountains before. And Steve and I released the bird here. Me again. Pressing the wrong buttons. We released the bird here at the bottom point, and the handler was there, 2 kilometers away, dressed in the clothing that he always wore when we were doing this particular test and swinging the lure. And the bird was released from where we were. We took the hood off and released the bird. And first off, it flew in circles because it had no idea where it was. And then ultimately, it saw the handler. It recognized the clothing that the handler was wearing. It was wearing fluorescent yellow. And so it knew where it was. And then it flew in the curve, exactly as I predicted it would. A curve until it got 300 meters away from the lure, and then it changed to binocular vision and flew in the last 300 so you would be able to seize the bird. Seize well, in its case, the lure, in the normal case, the prey. And so that's how they actually do it. They fly in a curve using their deep fovea vision. And one of the things which is really interesting is you would expect that you would need 2 eyes to hunt together. And so this last shot on this part of the talk is this particular bird, which is a French male peregrine, which is bred every year for the last 9 years, and I believe is actually breeding again this year. And it was born with only 1 eye. But despite the fact that it was born with only one eye, it has bred in all of those years and is an extremely successful hunter. Its doing fovea doesn't matter whether it's got one or two eyes because it's only using one anyway. But somehow or other, this clever bird has managed to hunt without binocular vision. Remarkable. Okay. What do we got? Now hand over to Steve.
Perhaps a small round of applause for him because he's not going to be on again. Thank you. That's very kind of you, thank you. Just from a human interest point of view, I have been studying at Simonsjap for 40 years, but I wasn't knee-high to a grasshopper when I started. I'm actually in my 8th decade. So there you are, bit of human interest for you. That's a beautiful image of a migrated FP calidus. Now I'm going to speed through some of this stuff because we haven't got much time, and Richard's taken by far the preponderance of it, which is quite right. No, it's quite right because he's the scientist and that would be of more interest to you, I think. So let's just quickly run through. That's the Eurasian bell tower female coming in with the male actually on duty there. This is an interesting, this is from Charing Cross Hospital. And this particular slide is the Azina. She's 4 years old. She was born on the Heineken brewery in, would you believe, the Netherlands. Came across 385 kilometres, found this, and there's going to be more on this a bit later. She's Ring Day ZN. He is Tom, he's been there 12 years. He is very highly submissive in his behaviour to her. This is typical because of what no doubt all of you know, females are much larger and more aggressive than males, and this is the case with many raptors, but in particular peregrines, you know, they are highly dominant. Not always, because they all have their own psychology, one finds. After you study these for a while, you realise that all birds are different, and they all have, and I'm getting a nod there from Phil, and no doubt Keith as well. They all have their own psychology. You cannot predict how they will respond to each other. But on this occasion, he is, as you can see, very submissive, even though he's older. This is the Eurasian bell tower male, taken by Peter Grimmett, just to show you what he looks like. I think it's a stunning photograph, a beautiful bird. This bird was found dead under the eyrie in December 2022. It's in a freezer with a friend of mine called Gareth Jones, and we are going to PM it at some point, hopefully. This is a teal that was found underneath the Eurasian bell tower with the head missing. Typically, birds, peregrines will obviously take out the cervical vertebrae when they kill, and they'll do that in mid-air so as to eliminate any problems with flying into the eyrie. So they take the head off, and the male in particular, pre-breeding season, will eat the head, typically. The female does as well, but there are lipids in the head, in the brain, that affect and improve sperm production. And that is one reason why males in particular take heads early in the breeding season, but they do so generally anyway. Now we've got a little short video which demonstrates how important it is and what we can learn and have learned over time at webcams on intimate behaviour and intimate vocalisations, which Derek Ratcliffe would have loved, I'm sure. So here's a little bit of footage to demonstrate that. Okay, she's in the bottom there. Whoa, well the male has just landed on the top of the nest box, and she's been surprised. She doesn't know who it is yet, she does now. And now shortly you're going to get some interesting vocalisations between the two. Whoa! That deep grunt. And then the high-pitched each. Beautiful vocalisation here. She's off. He's going to come in. He usually slides down the roof when he comes in, which he'll do now. some lovely vocalizations which inform us of intimate behaviour in the eyrie, which we see through with the benefit of webcams. Now this I'm going to run through very quickly because most of you will know all this stuff, but I've got hatch days and various hatch days and development of the chick, so here we go, I'll just run through this very quickly. Second hatch day 3 and day 5. Day 7, mum's got her talons all over the chick. She's also got a bit of food underneath her, but essentially she's shading them, this age chick at day 7, from the sun because they can't thermoregulate as yet. And they're just in as much danger from the sun as they are from cold weather and rain. Day 7 and day 10. Day 13, getting much larger. You can just see some pin feathers here. Day 16, 19 and 22, male and female. Day 24, this is at Evesham Bell Tower. Now I'm going to go back to day 23 at Charing Cross Hospital. And this is a Xena feeding her one young, and she's feeding it with parakeet. And Natalie Mayhew, who is a tremendous advocate and maintainer of FAB Peregrines, who does fantastic work in disseminating that information on social media. She's unbelievable. She must spend all her time doing this. She was very helpful in providing information on breeding to us over the period. And this is the split, and all these charts are done on biomass. So there are 40 or 50 prey charts in the book, and they've all been converted from the original numbers to biomass by reference to a weight table. The same weight table, so it's all homogeneous information. So that's what's happened. So we've got 6% by biomass ring-necked parakeets, and that represents 18 by number. Now forward day 29, day 33. Now look, day 29 is more down than feather. By day 33 there's more feather than down. And just to complete it, day 38, she fledged at day 40. Now this is a demonstration of Evesham Bell Tower 2022. On the bottom axis here you've got the days of the month, and then here you've got the time of the day. And what we wanted to do is understand where the incubation happened, who did it, when incubation didn't happen. So green is where incubation didn't happen. As most of you in this audience will know, probably all of you in the audience will know, they don't hard incubate until the penultimate egg, which begs the question, how do they know it's the penultimate egg? Now here we've got the incubation time from females in red and males in blue. And if you look at the generality of that, I'm going to show you Charing Cross Hospital by comparison now in the next image. But here we've got 65% female on eggs. The next one is Charing Cross, and you can see very different, much more preponderance of red. Dominant female, the female was not particularly dominant at Evesham Bell Tower, 84%. Now my view is that 84% is more typical. I don't know what the audience here thinks, but Keith is nodding furiously, well thank you Keith, and I think probably Phil might feel the same maybe. It's certainly the fact that I think that the females are typically more dominant than the males generally, and so therefore I think Evesham Bell Tower was slightly aberrant. Okay, that's just a nice picture of the female coming in. We use it as a reference point. And this is the female being kept off the eggs by the male. She wasn't as dominant. Normally, if this had been Charing Cross, she'd be on those eggs straight away and the male would skedaddle. He stayed on for an hour while she just stood there. Now here's a bit more footage for you, which is quite interesting sexual behaviours. Great vocalisation, really interesting. Female now taking the prey away, totally dominant, out the way the male gets, she's off, he comes in, and that is total dominance. Now what happens with a different male is completely different. She is much more submissive to him, strange. And this is just an example of the way the male came in. Lovely indication of vocalization, which is very informative. Okay, so now we're going to go on to friends and foes. Here, eagle owl with peregrine. Clearly, this is happening in Germany in particular, And what we have is a lot of nest boxes in some cities, but eagle owls are coming in to those cities, and using their rods in their eyes as opposed to the cones in peregrines, they are taking peregrines straight out of the eyrie, the nest box, at twilight, at night, and in the early morning, because the peregrines simply can't see as well as they can, because they have a predominance of cones and their foraging is in the day, whereas the owls are different. So the owls will just simply take them off the top of the nest box where they're roosting. They'll take adults directly, and in some European cities now where they're predominating, a third of peregrine boxes have now been supplanted by eagle owls. Now this is my study area. Simmons Yat, I've been studying this for 40 years. In 2017 we had 94 Canada geese on the river. The Canada geese took over 5 peregrine eyries on the 2 rock faces at Simmons Yat. Completely took them over, were in by March the 31st, before the peregrines would lay eggs. And they displaced the peregrines completely from their normal, traditional eyrie sites. The peregrines are then reduced to going into smaller holes, and they weren't so good, and their productivity reduced to 25% of the previous productivity. This has been noted by Ian Newton with regard to Canada geese and Egyptian geese. And he said and observed in America that if the eyrie was not enclosed, i.e. it was open, the peregrines would attack and eliminate them from that eyrie. If, however, the eyrie is closed, cavern, they cannot do that, and therefore they can't get them out. And this is still a problem at Simmons Yat and has been since 2017. We have a new pair at Simmons Yat who are much more aggressive, and they are attacking the Canada geese when they fly in. We also have, just out of interest, another pair within 600 metres at Simmons Yat. So we've got 2 breeding pairs, and they produced 6 young between them last year. But in the middle of those eyries, we have 2 goshawk territories, and they produce 5 between them. So what you get is a very interesting situation where you've got peregrines up in the air when they've got young fledged, you get gosses up in the air with young, and you get some very interesting interactions between peregrine and goss. And of course, as you might expect, because the peregrine is aerial, the peregrine male, 700 grams perhaps, against a female goss, 1500 grams perhaps, will dominate her and drive her out of the territory and actually hit her and take her into the wood. In the woodland, however, when the peregrine fledglings come into the wood and sit on the side of perhaps a Douglas fir, for instance, I haven't seen this, but we have lost birds just after fledging. We think the adult gosses are taking them off the trees. That's not something I've observed, it's something we've heard. This is a Verreaux's eagle in the territory of a miner, and it just shows that actually they don't care too much. They will attack anything, whatever size it is, and subdue them in their territory. Next one is an image that is remarkable in that it isn't photoshopped. This next one. Isn't that incredible? This is Chris Skipper at Norwich Cathedral. That's a lesser black-backed gull. That's a peregrine with prey. And the lesser black-backed gull is trying to harry the prey away from the peregrine. And if that peregrine's come in a couple of miles and it's tired and there's a number of gulls up there, then they will succeed in doing that. So therefore they are, very much a problem, a foe in some areas. However, the tables are sometimes turned. This is the Isle of Man. Immature herring gull. See the talons there? And the peregrine not only has got it round the neck, but it's also subdued its wings so it can't control its flight. If I bring that up closer, well, that herring gull was killed outright, and this is not unusual. This is a peregrine attacking a buzzard. Now, some of you may be aware of the Exeter buzzards. The Exeter buzzards are psycho. From 2009 to 2017, they killed 18 buzzards, dropping them down into the town centre. They attacked 480 observed. Here's some footage of that happening. This is live, and if you want to play a little game, you're a very esteemed audience, and I guess you're perhaps not up for that, but try to count how many stoops are used to attack this. And also, some of them are so fast, all you're going to see is the buzzard manoeuvring away, so count that as one as well. So see how many you think you've got. Just that last one hit that bird there. These are cycle stooping in rotation, 180 degrees aside from the other, and they're doing it quite deliberately as a strategy. Okay, so that's it. Is anybody interested in telling me how they think they were?
15. 25.
Yeah, I mean, Keith is closest, I think, 24 actually.
25.
25, you said sorry, I beg your pardon, I didn't hear you. 24 it is actually.
Oh, damn.
Oh, okay, I was going to give you a free egg as well if you got it right, but you didn't.
Oh, I've seen enough eggs.
But the reason I show that is to show you the extraordinary behaviour of peregrines at Exeter, which is aberrant. This is not normal. Yes, it is normal for peregrines to attack buzzards in the breeding season. That happens all the time. Yeah. Richard's just reminded me of something. It is normal behaviour for peregrines to attack buzzards and any raptor that comes into their territory, particularly in the breeding season, and particularly when they have small young in the eyrie. But to do it this way, it was remarkable, it's aberrant, but what it does show is it demonstrates the capability of flight of the peregrine in there. I thought it was fantastic. They're cycle stooping as fast, and they throw up very rapidly, and they almost seem to throw up at the same height they came from to defy physics. That's what the physics man says. Okay, so on occasion we were at Exeter in June 2018, happened to take Richard down there to see it, and he brought his camera, and we saw 2 buzzards killed outright in flight. Absolutely outright. Came down like a sycamore. Richard did the calculation. The peregrine hit with open claws like that, an open foot, not like that, open foot. Hit it on the head, clearly killed it outright. It came down like a sycamore seed, past the car park where we were in elevator position, went down into the high street and onto a table in Costa Coffee. That is not apocryphal, that is a true story. Now this is, I was speaking to someone earlier, can't see him in the audience actually, about Ratcliffe and the esteem in which we hold Ratcliffe. Ratcliffe was the foremost conservationist of his time, foremost scientist. He proved the link between DDT and cyclodine pesticides and eggshell thinning. That's a story I don't propose to tell it again today. It's an interesting story, and all I say is I admire him, and he's a hero of mine, Derek Ratcliffe. He wrote the Bible, the Peregrine Falcon, which stands good today. Things have moved on a lot since he wrote that book, the second edition in 1993, so there is space now for another monograph. This might not look particularly interesting, however, this is, I had a phone call from a guy called Mark Wilson, who is a lead population man at BTO. He said to me, Steve, I've just had 12 boxes of Derek Ratcliffe's archives put into Thetford. Would you be interested in having a look at them? Well, I said, well, of course I would. So I went down, had a look at them, extracted some information, got permission from Ratcliffe's family to use this stuff. This has never been published. That is his map done in 1960 when he was appointed to do the survey, which, by the way, was done on an incorrect basis, i.e. pigeon fanciers in 1959 lobbied the government to say too many pigeons were being taken by peregrines, peregrine population was too high. Ratcliffe did the survey only to find they were in headlong decline. And there are other little paradoxes here that happened in this story. But that's his map, which has never been published before. It shows what he considered to be peregrine country, and the blue cross marks are the people he had to do the surveys. So I think that's a really important historical document. This is also, I think, quite important, because this is Ratcliffe at the age of 18 taking a photograph of a clutch of eggs on the 18th of April 1947. Little would he have known that that very clutch could have been the harbinger for the DDT problem. Those could have already have had DDT in them. He would never have known that. Of course, he would never have known what was going to happen. He would never have known also that he's going to be the leading figure in resolving the issue. So now, one of the things that I contributed to the book was population, and I am mindful that it's nearly 7:45, so I think we're running very perilously close to time. Yeah, so do you want me to finish fairly quickly now?
No, I think just carry on, please.
Well, yeah, shall I?
I defer to the chairman.
Okay, all right. Well, tell me when to stop, would you? Because I could go on forever about peregrines. But you know. Okay, well, the population thing is quite interesting, but what is even more interesting is something we found out, which is new science in the process of writing this book. It's about natal site type fidelity. Let me talk to you about population. This is a map of the land use of the UK in 2012. It won't have changed much by then. And what you can see is here, there's a colour-coded key. Now, the built infrastructure here, in red, forms 8.4% of the land mass of the UK, or land area of the UK, I should say. Farmland pastures forms 29% and is the lighter yellow. The green farmland arable is that green there. We did this because we wanted to understand what the underlying land use, how that would impact populations of peregrines. Now clearly there is an absolute correlation between DDT use and arable farming. And you will find that the population was almost eliminated in areas of DDT use, which is represented by the green, and it correlates very highly with the loss of peregrines through the UK. So then we thought, okay, well let's put this in, because there is an implication for future development of the population of peregrines that they are now they're highly urbanised. There is a massive growth in urban peregrines, which I'll look at shortly, centred around cities, villages and towns. So the red area here defines where they might go, and if we know what density typically they're going to be at in towns and cities, then we can infer from that what that population might increase to. It is being limited by territoriality already, and I think that Phil's nodding his head, and we're seeing great signs of iris now being attacked by incoming third birds and disrupting breeding behaviour, and it's happening in London now, particularly at Morden, I think, Phil. There's been a weird situation happening at Morden. You might know that. Yeah. Well, but very quickly, there were a couple of males coming in all the time. They obviously did mate with a female. They had 3 eggs, 4 eggs, I think, and very late incubation, very late hatch, and the male then, as soon as the birds hatched, took the chick, killed it, and took it away. And that happened once, twice, 3 times this year. And I think we're going to see more of that. Anyway, I digress. So we reconstructed Ratcliffe's information, and I've done a study of population for the 40 years, because not only have I been looking at Sim and Jacques, but I've been a student of peregrines and all the works on peregrines. We've recast all his work on the basis of the new definition of population, which is a 27 region definition which occurred in 2002 and 2014. We've adjusted all Ratcliffe's prior data from 1939 to 1991 on the basis of the new definition of areas. So we've reconstructed it completely. And this is time consuming, but this is what we get, because we can now quite clearly densities from 1939 through to 2014, which I'll do here. So 1962, 426 pairs. This is territorial pairs. In 1939, it was Ratcliffe's view, because he had to estimate back to 3039 when he started his survey in 61. He thought at that point, by reconstruction, that that was the shape of where, now clearly you can see the densities. So the highest density is 1 to 50 kilometres squared per pair, and then white goes to no pairs. Don't take too much notice of that. Just note, when I go through these, that the darker brown, the more density there is in that particular area. So 62, you can see, in 62, from 3039, 426 pairs, it halved, and that's the low point of peregrine population in the UK, subject to DDT and cyclidine pesticides. Now you're going to see the one on the right morphs, now it's 71. In 10 years, only 11 more pairs, so very slow increase. So this one stays the same. So we've now morphed to 1981, and you just look at the colours, 783 pairs going up. 1991, we've surpassed now 3039 base level, and we're getting a preponderance of birds here and here, but notice that the highlands are still reduced less than the original 1930-39 population. If we go to 2002, we've now got a further increase. And in particular, I'd usually spend a bit more time on this, but now we morph it through to 2014. What we've got is clear evidence of the urbanisation of birds coming into towns and quarries. And we've now got East Anglia, the Central Midlands, being occupied by peregrines, which will go from an area where, look, in 3039 they were previously not there at all. So we have a population of 1753 pairs. By the way, those who know their population numbers will know that the headline number was 1769, if that's familiar with you. We've chosen to knock out the 16 Channel Island pairs because we don't believe that the respective previous data is necessarily accurate. So this is just UK excluding Jersey and Guernsey. This is a kite map, which is a simple example of how that population has changed for various areas. And you can see that some of them, like Central East England, start the population in 1991, then you can see how it's developed over time, and then you can refer that development in that particular area to other developments in others. So it gives you a pen picture visualization of population movement, spatially and temporally. Now I'm going to run through these very quickly. I'm not finishing.
Well, if I tend to...
Right, yeah, I can do. 3 minutes. Okay, no, what we'll do, I'm going to run through it. I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Sorry. Okay, natal site type fidelity is something we looked at anew. This hasn't been done before. So the idea is you go to the BTO, get all their records of all the birds that they've ringed at certain natal site types. Then those that go on, having been ringed as youngsters, to breed, again, where did they go? So is there any correlation between natal site type and breeding site type? How true to where they were born do they breed? So, if we take natural inland, of 45 sample, 22 stayed on natural inland, 21 went to quarries. Very importantly, 2 went to human structures, 2. With quarries, 9 went to quarries, 7 went to natural inland sites. And the quarry and a natural inland site are quite similar. None went to human structures. Coast, we've got very few examples, but it's all the examples BTO had. 3 coastal birds out of 5, 3 went to the coast. These were all born on the coast. 1 went to a quarry, 1 went to a natal structure, went to a human structure site. Now, this is the key thing that we found, which is really interesting, I think. We have 18, 22, 25, 26. We have 29 examples here of birds that were born on human structures. Where did they go on to subsequently breed? Well, 18 plus 4, and I'll explain why that's different, 22, i.e. 77%, which is the greatest percent, stayed site faithful, i.e. 22 out of 29 that were born on human structures went on to breed on human structures. A few went to, 3 went to natural inland, 1 went to the coast, 3 went to quarries. That 4, those 4 are all females that came across the channel from France and the Netherlands. So now, having got all this data, we can say that more birds came from abroad to fill to maintain this urban structure population and to start it than came from our own traditional site types, which is interesting because it correlates with Germany, Belgium and France in that their urban population started much earlier, and they are now getting saturated urban populations, and the female dispersal is such that she can disperse across the channel, and to normal dispersal, females will disperse a lot further. Ed Joy's doing a paper on that at the moment. They will disperse 250 miles. So it's a hop over the channel, it's a normal dispersal. Males won't. And there's no surprise, therefore, that those 4 are all female. So what we are now putting forward is that actually the human structure population increase was partly, if not mostly, put there by foreign birds, i.e. come across the channel into urban. And it's no surprise either that the urban population increase has happened in London, southern areas, but not in the north, i.e. the areas more adjacent to the continent. So there's two reasons why we think that is the case. So that is, we found that very, very interesting, and it's never been, to my knowledge, we haven't had a paper on it before, so this is new information, I think. I estimate, and I'm going to finish now, because I'm sure 10 to 8's come and gone, is it? I'm going to finish now by saying we think, based on what we've seen and the evidence we've got on sample populations, that population level territory holding of UK peregrines is now around about 2,000 to 2,250 pairs. Thank you very much indeed.
How much evidence is there really that peregrines are benefiting from that?
I have no idea how much they're benefiting from it. What we know is that in hobbies, for instance, they appear to benefit from it.
Listen, you know, you might.
Is that it? Ah, right, okay. We know that hobbies have it, generally, hobbies do it, and it does protect them from being attacked, apparently. It seems to be fairly rare in peregrines, but we've certainly seen it, and there is one photograph in the book of somebody with them.
I saw the photo in the book and I wasn't convinced by it, that's why I'm asking.
No, that's fine.
Okay. I take a point entirely, but thanks for the praise for the book, much appreciated. I've seen this before, observing in the field on multiple occasions, so it's not an aberration of plumage. But, you know, it seems logical that it would be sensible for peregrines to have ocelli in the same way as hobbies do, for exactly the same reason, either they're less likely to get attacked from behind. So there is this one photograph which does demonstrate that. I've seen it in the field myself in other places. I want to put it open to the room. Has anyone else seen this? Ocelli in the back of the head. Eye type. No? Okay. Other observers have seen it as well. Children told me about it some time ago. So, you know, I think it's more than just one photograph, if that's the point you're making. Yeah. Okay.
Anyone else?
A couple of quick ones. One for Richard. Richard, how can we get the information across about the effectively the non-peer-reviewed papers on high dive speeds, stoop speeds, to organisations like Cornell and so on? Everybody quotes these astonishing dive speeds, and it seems really difficult to get people down to peer-reviewed science and the information that you talked about tonight. I'm not really expecting an answer to that one, but the other point very quickly for Steve was just to say that really interested about the continental birds coming over, because we've seen a few in London. There's another one this year turned up as a stranger, I think at Sutton. But also the ringing that I've been doing in the Greater London area, again, so extraordinary movement on from those birds, not just to the Midlands and the South Coast, but, you know, one female as far as Edinburgh sat in a power station. So, you know, the story goes on.
As far as speed is concerned, I mean, it doesn't matter how often we say this, because people just carry on. David Attenborough was quoting 200 miles an hour, not more than a few weeks ago. But, I mean, you know, if you do the calculation, 180 is the fastest you can ever produce. 130 is the fastest it's ever been seen. And I was on a heavier bird, Gyrfalcon. I don't quite know how to get this across, because this frightful bird in America just dominates everything. I mean, I wrote to Guinness Book of Records and said, take out your 242 because it's a nonsense. And they did take it out, but they wrote it in such a way that they actually said it anyway. Despite the fact that, you know, I was pointing out to them, 242 at 17,000 feet is not relevant. But I don't know what to do, really. I suppose you could try an article in British Birds. I've no idea if they bother to print it.
Going in my review.
Is it? Good, oh, well done, thank you.
The problem here is also that other articles, multiple articles, will reference this 200 miles an hour. And it's almost as if you tell a lie enough times, it will become truth. So we're seeing, I've had this discussion with various people on the P4P website and also privately from that, where we talk about speed. And often it comes down to, oh yes, but there's a reference in XYZ and it says 200 miles an hour. But when you take it back to the original reference source, it's frightful. You know, and it just isn't peer reviewed. That science is not peer reviewed. It's at an altitude which is not foraging altitude, and it's become an urban myth. But I think there is room to do some more careful scientific work on speed of peregrines, because I do have a view, and Richard has a view, that they are capable of doing 180 miles an hour, but we've not seen any science peer-reviewed work on it. So that's that. On the other one, I think what we're getting, very briefly, what we're getting is these birds coming over from Europe, consolidating themselves as females in London, as an example, and then because the dispersal distance of females is so large, then those birds from London are taking 250 miles going up to Edinburgh, and therefore the urban population is increasing in that way. And I believe that is the stimulus for a big increase in human structure population growth over the next 10, 15 years. But territoriality will limit it everywhere, is my view.
And worth saying that the lack of persecution in urban settings is a tremendous
100%.
driving force.
Exactly, and isn't it wonderful, isn't it wonderful that for once humans are on their side, do everything to help them, whereas traditionally in quarries and grouse moors, they've been persecuted very, very badly indeed. Isn't this a wonderful turnaround in the human agency, where we can help them now and are doing so and increasing the population?
Thank you very much.